Here we have yet another generator that's been sitting for a long time and now it won't start. It's got a Briggs & Stratton 14 horsepower engine. Right now the electric start won't crank because the battery's dead. It's got a pull start, but I'm not about to work that hard, so I'll hook up the charger and hope the battery still works. Here's a tip. I like to keep this old school manual charger around because most automatic chargers won't even turn on if the battery's completely dead. Alright, let's see what we have. Make sure it has oil. Fuel valve is on, ignition is on, choke on. From the sound of the engine cranking, I can tell compression seems okay, and I do smell fuel in the exhaust. Now, if you don't smell any fuel in the exhaust, you absolutely have a fuel problem. That is, the engine's not getting any fuel. My expert nose can detect the presence of fuel, but it can't determine how much fuel. So even though you know it's getting fuel, don't rule out fuel problems just yet because you don't know if it's getting enough fuel. From my experience though, anytime a carbureted engine's been sitting a long time and won't start, you should suspect a clogged carb. You can go straight to the carb cleaner test, that is, spraying carb cleaner into the intake to see if it starts. If it starts, you know compression and spark are okay, the only thing missing is fuel. But let's pretend we're doing this in a more proper manner. So let's check for spark. We'll hook up a spark tester. The light's flashing and it's pretty bright, so we know we have spark, at least to the spark plug. What about the spark plug itself? The plug looks okay, but I'm going to clean it anyway. Now I'm going to do the old carb cleaner trick. I don't have starting fluid or carb cleaner, so I'm using brake cleaner. Well, that may have been a little too much brake cleaner, but now we know spark and compression are okay. So our only problem is the engine's not getting enough fuel. Time to remove and clean the carb. Remove the choke cable. Remove the air filter housing. Disconnect the throttle linkage and spring. Shut off the fuel. Disconnect the fuel hose. And remove the carb. Because there's fuel in the carb, it confirms the float needle isn't stuck closed. I'll explain later. Since I don't have new gaskets, I'm going to be careful not to damage the old gaskets. If you happen to break the old one, you can use a little silicone on the broken area. Clean the outside of the carb using a paintbrush and carb cleaner, brake cleaner, lacquer thinner, or acetone so you don't get dirt from the outside into the carb. Remove the bowl. Remove the pin that holds the float on. Sometimes these pins are installed loose, sometimes they're press fit like this one. The thing that fell off the float is the float needle. Remember how I poured a bunch of fuel out of the carb earlier? The bowl holds an amount of fuel. The float and needle are responsible for keeping that bowl full of fuel, but not too much. Fuel enters the carb through this hole. The float needle sits inside the hole. When the needle drops, the hole opens up and fuel is allowed to enter the bowl. As the fuel level rises, the float rises up and pushes the needle into the hole, stopping the flow of fuel to the bowl so it doesn't get overfilled. If the carb had no fuel in the bowl, I'd suspect the needle was stuck closed. If I had fuel constantly leaking out of the carb, I'd suspect the needle was stuck open, allowing the bowl to overflow with fuel. This rubber plug probably plugs up the hole for what would have been a pilot jet. Most carbs have a small jet called a pilot jet and a larger jet called a main jet. Pilot jets control fuel when the engine's at low idle speed, but this engine's always running at fast idle, so it only has a main jet. You'll often find this with generators that don't have a function that automatically switch them to low idle when they're not in use, like this one. It's also common with pressure washers. Those things run at high idle all the time. Some carbs have the jets installed vertically, usually inside a hole like this, but this one's installed sideways. So fuel gets sucked up from the bowl through this jet, up this tube into the body of the carb. Gotta make sure I don't lose that plug. Jets are the smallest fuel passages in this type of carb. You check a jet by holding it up to the light to make sure the hole isn't clogged. As you can see, the hole in the main jet is pretty large, so it's not easy for a main jet to get clogged. A pilot jet would have a much smaller hole, so they clogged very easily. This main jet obviously doesn't look clogged, but I'll clean it anyway. Everything seems to move freely and looks pretty clean. This is the throttle plate. And this is the choke plate. We clean out the jet by stripping some small electrical wire and using the wire strands. Don't use any solid metal objects to clean jets. Brass is a soft metal. It's easy to accidentally enlarge the jet holes. Now I'm going to use electrical wire and carb cleaner to clean out all the other holes and tubes as well. Here's the thing about cleaning carbs. Half the time, the clog is not going to be obvious, like in this case. The main jet actually looked okay, but obviously something's not letting fuel through, so you clean everything, any hole you think might be an air or fuel passage, because you can't see inside those passages. Now it's time to put everything back together. Gotta make sure this gasket goes on the right way. Fuel on, choke on, another generator back in use. Honestly, even after doing this 100 times, I'm still surprised every time a carb cleaning fixes a no-start problem. And if after you clean the carb it still doesn't start, clean it again, maybe a third time. Sometimes I find I have to do it 2 or 3 times before I find success.